God be with you. It is a privilege to be here with you this morning, and I bring you greetings on behalf of Reverend Molly Carlson, our conference minister in the Illinois Conference United Church of Christ. I am here on behalf of the conference staff, and together with you, we are the 240 UCC churches, 60,000 UCC members, and covenant partners in healthcare, higher education, and public ministry in the northern two-thirds of Illinois, from the Iowa to the Indiana borders, north to Wisconsin, and south to Springfield. I was baptized, confirmed, and ordained in the Nebraska Conference of the United Church of Christ. If I kept going a little further west from here, I would arrive on my parents' doorstep in Lincoln, Nebraska, where they are members of First Plymouth United Church of Christ, although I think they are in virtual attendance this morning here at First Congregational Moline. I spent my ministerial career in parish ministry for 25 years here in the Illinois Conference, most recently 17 years at the First Congregational Church of Wilmette as senior pastor head of staff, before joining the conference staff in February 2022. In Wilmette, I managed a staff and a building about two-thirds scale from this one. So I am familiar with boilers and nursery schools and some of the challenges and the legacy, I think, that you are custodians and stewards of here in this place. In my work with the Illinois Conference, I resource churches in what we call the search and call process, churches that are in times of pastoral transition throughout the conference, and I look forward to chatting with you and answering your questions following worship this morning. Please join me in prayer. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I am not sure that there is much more to preach following that children's sermon this morning, but I'll add a few more words of interpretation along those same themes. In the gospel story this morning, we encounter Jesus as teacher, the divine pastor to souls, and we learn from him about a man named Lazarus, who is a leper covered with sores sitting outside the gate of the rich man's apparently fine, elegant home. The wealthy man dies, just as Lazarus dies. One departs for the underworld, the other into the bosom of the patriarch Abraham. In the underworld, the rich man realizes that Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, while he, the one well off in life, is apparently in agony. The rich man begs Father Abraham to move him to comfort too, or at least to go and warn his brothers to amend their lives. Father Abraham replies that they have Moses and the prophets, so what other ethical wisdom do they need? Jesus tells us this story in the Gospel of Luke, and he supplies us with the ethical wisdom of Moses and the prophets in the Gospel of Matthew, when he says that the criteria by which God judges is, as you did to the least of these, you did it to me. If there is to be divine judgment, these are the criteria. Did the rich man notice Lazarus, the leper, at the gate to his house? Who did we notice or fail to notice? Who did we clothe? Whose thirst did we slake? Who did we care for and who did we pass by? I suspect that many of us do not like to think of divine judgment at all. And we are right to particularly disagree with the overconfidence of some of our Christian brothers and sisters that they can sit on thrones of judgment, wielding a sharp moral sword in what we call the current culture wars. We are adept at recognizing when other people are judging, and we are good biblical readers when we know that the criteria of judgment are not the ones that Jesus actually is using in these circumstances. But what is harder, I think, for all of us is to realize that we are always judging, and some of that is fair. We have to make decisions. We have to discern between right and wrong. We have to weigh the merits of one path of life versus another, time and time again in different life stages. So we are constantly exercising judgment about everything from what to buy, where to live, what church to belong to, whom to vote for, how to conduct ourselves. What is harder, though, is to realize that judging another's motives or morality brings us into more difficult territory. But that is hard to escape. Everything from the news to social media, the locker room at the fitness club, the PTA meeting, and yes, many church coffee hours are replete with conversations which wander into judgment. Part of our fallen human nature seems to be that we are better at judging others than turning the lens of judgment and introspection onto ourselves. Sometimes in the church, we judge ourselves by certain criteria. Is the church growing? Usually this means numerically. Is the balance sheet solid? Is the budget in the black? We judge ourselves against what we perceive to be the glory days of the church, or the days of pre-pandemic, the way that it used to be. I hear a lot about the glory days and the pre-pandemic times as I cross the Illinois conference. All of us are likely in these conversations to forget that the criteria of judgment Jesus gives even to the churches: did we notice? Did we care? Did we look, or did we turn away? Thankfully, we know that Jesus is the incarnation of God's compassion, and that God is a compassionate judge. The letter of James tells us that mercy will triumph over judgment. The parable of the prodigal son tells us, in essence, that though we are not as good as the best thing we've ever done, we are not as bad as the worst thing we've ever done. And that is a welcome gospel relief. We are welcomed home by our generous, forgiving God, who wants to set the table and summon all people to the feast, every last one of us. So we learn about this God in our gospel reading this morning. And while it emphasizes God's judgment, it offers us guidance for the standards by which we are called to live. As Jeff said earlier, we have a responsibility to one another and to the communities in which we live. So these are the standards by which we judge our church life. Is our discourse kind and uplifting? Are we capable of seeing another point of view? Are we capable of being forgiving? Will we genuinely care for one another, for our staff, for our pastors, for the neighborhood around us, for those in need. God is generous and forgiving, and God is morally serious simultaneously. And it is our path in life to discern how to be morally discerning, giving, and forgiving all at once. We find another variation on this gospel wisdom in a rabbinic story, which might have circulated from another rabbi at or just after the time of Jesus' life. It appears in a collection of stories, Jewish stories, called the Babylonian Talmud. And it goes like this. Someone came and said, "Where shall we look for the Messiah? Shall the Messiah come to us on clouds of glory, robed in majesty, crowned with light?" So Rabbi Joshua ben Levi put the question to the prophet Elijah himself. "Where shall I find the Messiah?" he asked. "At the gate of the city," the prophet Elijah replied. "How shall I recognize the Messiah?" the rabbi asked. "He sits among the lepers," the prophet said. And the rabbi replied, "Among the lepers? What is he doing there?" And the prophet Elijah said, "The Messiah changes their bandages. He changes them one by one." Praise be to God who changes our bandages, who binds up our wounds, who forgives us when we stray, who welcomes us back as the prodigal children, who calls and commands us to notice the least of these and to do the same. May it be so for us.